I'd like to introduce John Ralston Saul. He is an award-winning essayist and novelist, a longtime champion of freedom of expression. He was the elected president of PEN International from 2009 to 2015. He's a leading voice in the international movement supporting immigrants and refugees, and as he pointed out to me, he is an author. He has, one of his most influential books has been a book called Fair Country, and it talks truths about Canada. So without any further ado, welcome, John.
Evening. Whoops. Do I have to move this up? Can you hear me? Is that all right? Yes? Okay, great. You know, on 28th of March, a few weeks ago, the second most powerful man in the world, I think his name is Vance, went with his wife to Greenland to watch the dogs race. And it follows naturally that the National Security Advisor went with them. This is probably the first time in history that two of the most powerful people in the world went to another country, not on a holiday, but out of their sincere and deep interest for dog races. And Trump insisted that they'd been invited. The Prime Minister of Greenland insisted they had not been invited, and said that it was a highly aggressive move. I forget if it was Vance or Trump said that they were there to defend against the Chinese Communist Party interfering in Greenland. And then Trump said more seriously, we're going to get it one way or the other. So why am I telling you this story? I've always been a fan of the surreal movement. I mean, this is beyond comedy. This is surreal in the real 1920s, 30s sense. It's dark comedy. It's humor of the darkest possible sort. And of course, it's also, I'm describing, a dry run for the Canadian Arctic. Sometime, I don't know exactly when, I would think that you'll find American leaders, something will happen, they'll start talking a lot about Chinese ships and Russian ships using the Northwest Passage, and then they'll say, well, we'd better send American ships, and then there'll be a reason for American ships to put down anchors, and then for people to come ashore, and well, if you come ashore, you've got to sleep, so then they'll build some sort of camp. That's actually called an invasion, but it'll all be done, you know, as if nothing were happening, as if it were perfectly normal. And I would say that within a decade, we could lose about half of Canada, quite easily. It's really that close. And Greenland, even though it was fascinating for Canadians that a population of somewhere around 60,000 Greenlanders outsmarted the Vice President of the United States and his wife and the security advisor. So I suppose we should be able to do it too, but maybe the Americans have learned, so when they come, they'll be more serious about how they do it. I don't know, but we have to be ready for the fact that they're going to come. Why? Well, I think first, you know, we have to, I think what the two of you are saying is so true and so disturbing, but we have to also think to ourselves very seriously about what the American elite, whether it's political or business or bureaucratic, says to itself in dinner parties, says quietly to itself, does papers in the Pentagon on. I was once in the Pentagon. It's an astonishing place. They do talk among themselves a great deal. And I think that my belief, and from all the research that I've done over the decades, I think it's fair to say that a large portion of the US elite has always rejected the idea of Canada's existence. It has never been accepted. It's always been there as sort of locked up because of deals we've done. You know, the principal job of the Canadian Prime Minister is to somehow figure out how to keep the Americans off our back. That's the #1 job of every Canadian Prime Minister for almost 200 years. So it's always been there, and periodically this idea of the US elite is unlocked, and then we have a crisis, and it has happened before. And Trump has now unlocked the safe and brought out these ideas. Why has he done this? Well, you know, in part, the fundamental reason is because we have this gigantic natural wealth. We're just so lucky. It's not because we're smart. We didn't do anything to get it. We're just really lucky. We're one of the richest countries in the world when it comes to every form of natural wealth. The second reason is that, you know, there's a fundamental philosophical idea which began before the American Revolution and is still there, and it is that when you use the word America, you're talking about North America. There is no such thing as the United States. It's America. It's one of the reasons that I try very hard never to talk about Americans or America, because it's their way of describing their ownership or their desire to own the entire continent. And the other reason that it's being brought up is it's a classic distraction when there's a mess at home. When there's a mess at home, you always talk about the next door country in order to get people to think about, well, there's a problem with Canada, as opposed to there's a problem with unemployment, or there's a problem with poverty, or there's a problem with bringing back poverty, or taking away women's rights. No, we're not taking away women's rights. There's a problem with Canada. And so when Trump started talking that way, it was about laying the groundwork for there being a problem with Canada. He'll see how far he wants to take it. Now, I want to add to that a thing we don't say often enough, which is the United States is theoretically a democracy. There are votes. It has always been a profoundly fragile democracy. Remember that it's something like 70 or 80% of its exports were slave-based products until the 1870s, slave or former slave production until something like the 1870s or 80s. Until the 1960s, the economy was to a great extent built on the leftovers of a slave-based built society. It's always been a society from the very beginning, because of the way it revolted against the British, which turned inwards. With the Second World War, they were attacked, they were forced into it, and they had to turn outwards. That's not their natural tendency. They're an inward-looking country, except in terms of control or power over the Americans. So, as a result of the war, they went on and were part of international alliances against communism, and now that's over. And so now, without that kind of anti-Nazi, anti-communist drive, they're going back to the old model, which goes to the beginning of the United States, up until the Second World War, which is the desire to turn inwards and to dominate the Americas. And if he survives the midterms, I mean, some people say if there are midterms, I think there will be. I'm not sure there'll be another real presidential election, but there'll be an election of some sort. If he survives the midterms, then the threat to democracy in the United States will become very real. And I do think that it just has to be said again and again and again, that Supreme Court decision to remove controls on political funding is the single most important decision that, apart from a coup d'etat, which could have been made in any country, but in the United States, to take it down the road away from anything that could be called real democracy. So they're already chipping away at what could be called serious democracy. And in that context, my belief is that after the midterms, the threat to Canada will be revived and activated in a serious way. I'm usually pretty bad on dates. I'm usually very good on what's going to happen, and I usually get the dates wrong. But so, I think it's going to happen. I think it's after the midterms. I'm probably wrong about the second part. But here's the thing. When Trump says all these loopy things, all these nutty things he says, and he can't stop talking, right? He's got logorrhea. He sits down every day and he just talks. I mean, Caesar does not do that unless he's certifiable. There's a serious problem. He just sits there and he says all this stuff, and when he can't think what else to say, he just keeps talking. But everything that he says, there's something serious in it, even though it is loopy. And so when he talks about the southern border, even though it was nonsense what he says, he's serious about it. When he attacked Trudeau, when he talked about the governor, that was all serious undermining of the idea that Canada is a real place. And I've written a lot about Mussolini. You'll forgive me. I used to do a lot of research. It was in a number of my books. And as soon as in the second term, everything Trump does reminds me of Mussolini. I mean, Mussolini is not like Hitler. I mean, they're both awful people, but Mussolini is much more interesting as a political figure, much more complicated in a way. But at the heart of Mussolini is the fact that he was a bully. What's a bully? A bully is somebody who picks on people who's weaker than they are. Why do they pick on people who are weaker than they are? Because they're a coward. So I've just summarized what I think about Mr. Trump. He's a bully, which means he's a coward. On the other hand, he's managed to get control of the biggest force, military force in the world, which means that even a bully who is a coward can be extremely dangerous. And we've seen, as we saw with Mussolini, and I could give you other historic examples, bullies in power are incredibly dangerous if they have armies. So how do we prepare ourselves for the situation which I think is coming? Well, I think the first thing we have to do is, in a non-nationalistic, a non-romantic way, we have to clarify to ourselves how we think about ourselves. And we have to do it in a kind of very matter-of-fact way, so that when we're dealing with the world, we know exactly who we are and the way to talk. We are, I mean, I'm going to say some things which are so silly. We are the second biggest country in the world. We are a very old, stable democracy. We're one of the oldest stable democracies in the world. We are the oldest continuous democratic federation in the world. It's a terrible sentence. We are the oldest continuous democratic federation in the world. The United States is not continuous. They blew themselves up with the Civil War. Since 1848, we've been working on what we're doing. We're a very peculiar experiment, not based on the Euro-US mythological model of one people, one culture, one language. Instead, the whole country's based on living with complexity, incredible complexity, building the country on a triangular foundation of indigenous, francophone, and anglophone, and that produces then a Métis nation, which we recognize in the Constitution. And then on top of all of that foundation, layer upon layer of newcomers come and shape the country, increasing. Every layer comes and there's a new shape to the country based on that foundation. So this celebration of complexity, no other democracy in the world celebrates complexity. They're trying to produce simplicity. Oh, this is what we are. And Canada says, when the Canadians ask, well, it's really complicated. How much time do you have? And at the same time, as I said, we're lucky. We have minerals, unbelievable. We have so many trees. We have so much oil and gas. We're so lucky. And we're still saying to ourselves, we have this small population. We don't have a small population. There are 41 million of us. That's a big population. We have the 8th biggest population of the 32 Western-style democracies. So we have a big weight in terms of the people, well-educated people, middle-class people largely. We have one of the highest standards of living in the world, above the USA, one of the highest life expectancies, much higher than the USA. We have a pretty decent system of public education, and our elites do not come out of the private schools. The private schools produce mainly stockbrokers, as far as I could make out. But the government's run largely, the government, the civil service, the ambassadors are run by people out of the public school system. You know, my wife was Governor General, comes out of the public school system. I come out of the public school system. Who went to a private school here? You don't have to answer. Anyway, so I just want to say, in spite of all of this, in 1988, we had a big drama, a big election And we decided to change the direction of the country. We had always had a policy which was based on how can we sell as much as possible to the United States but keep as big a distance from the United States as possible. Very difficult. Our prime ministers have always been, that's why I've always said that the characteristic of a Canadian prime minister is you have to be hypocritical, you have to know how to lie, you have to, all these things. Otherwise you couldn't keep the Americans on side without getting too deeply in bed with them. So we inverted our direction and decided to integrate our economy into the United States. And now, 4 decades later, the United States, with the rights of a great power, has decided to change directions and has gone back into 19th century nationalism. So here we are, stuck, because we decided to integrate, and they've just said, oh, well, tough titty, you know? You do what you can. I mean, we're not there for you now. And so here we are in an existential struggle to rediscover the idea of diversity, political diversity, which dominated Canada from the 1850s to 1988. So the question is, can that be done? Can we actually find our way back into international diversity, into complexity? A way, not to get out of the American market, we got to keep as much of that as we can finagle, but can we get ourselves into as complicated a situation as possible at the international level? Yeah, we can do it. It's going to be a hell of a lot harder than it would have been in '88, which is what people like me were for, but it can be done. And frankly, a lot of countries out there, a lot of regions, a lot of organizations, multinational organizations, are going to be looking for reliable allies in the Americas. Pretty well comes down to us. Maybe Mexico. We should be doing a lot more with Mexico. A lot more with Mexico. A lot of people are looking to be allied with people who are rich in resources, stable, trustworthy, a stable democracy, a middle-class model, comfortable with the reality of linguistic and racial complexity. It's one of the things we're best at, which so many countries are struggling with, and we don't even have really a lot of laws about it. We just sort of, stumble along, and we figured out how to make it work. And a strong public education system, and a strong public health care system. Don't listen to the voices from the private sector coming in from the United States who are trying to trick us into bringing in a two-tiered healthcare system. 5 minutes in England will tell you why that doesn't work. The rich go to the private, and the others go to the public. So what I've been describing are the qualities which can carry us internationally, but we have to beware that some of our leaders, I don't know how many, but some of our leaders are going to lose courage as they lose the comfort of reliance on the United States. They haven't quite gone to bed long enough to realize what's happening and how difficult it's going to be for them. They're so used to going to a meeting in New York and then to their house in Florida. It's so much more complicated. They might have to learn another language. They might have to go to countries across seas and do deals. Fortunately, we have a lot of newer, a couple of generations old, for example, in South Asia and East Asia, who can help us rebuild our economy in other parts of the world. And I think they will take the lead, not the old Bay Street crew, who will be more and more of a problem in the short run. So we mustn't listen to the people who want us to sacrifice our strengths in order to re-seduce Washington, in order to save money, in order to be more efficient, et cetera, et cetera. If we falter, if we show weakness, the United States, frankly, will gobble us up. We're at that period. 30 years ago, it wasn't that kind of time. This is a different time. It's out of the box now. They will gobble us up. If we show confidence, then the best in the United States will embrace us and stand up with us, not as friends, but as allies. Countries don't have friends, they have allies. And we will be able to build new alliances. It'll be an enormous task. It's a gigantic task. And if there are people here who are under 40, I think this is your life. This is the rest of your life. This is the next 40 to 50 years. Just as it was 40 years to get us to where we are now, the problem that we're in now, it's 40 to 50 years to get us out of this problem. It will be the drama of your lives. But I think these gatherings, I mean, this is really, after a long weekend, this is not a bad turnout, you know? After all that food and drink, if people are still vertical enough to get here and sit down and stay, everyone's awake. I mean, it's amazing, you know, all that food. So these gatherings show me that a lot of people want to engage, that it's happening all over the place. And we just have to keep reminding ourselves and telling particularly younger people who are discovering public life, like you, in a way for the first time, even though you may have discovered it through your parents, that it's incredibly boring part of the time. It's incredibly rough and tumble. Nobody thanks you. Everybody insults you. It's endless. On the other hand, it's pretty exciting when you're standing for a great cause. It may not be easy, but it is rewarding. And frankly, for the people who are just starting down this road, I envy you. Thank you very much. Whatever.
We want to get everyone out by 8:30, so maybe 2 questions, relatively quick ones, if possible.
None? All right. Yes, there's one there.
I hope I'm not naive, but an idea was floated that Canada could be an important ingredient in allies with Europe to form a powerful force of 400 million people. There was a mention of a shared border somewhere in the Arctic that might give us route to NATO. Do you think such an alliance is really what it would take to stand against America and maybe the power of Asia, so that there's a balance?
Yeah, I mean, you know, frankly, after really from Pierre Trudeau on, there have been governments in Canada which have tried to strengthen our political and economic relationships with Europe. And we have all sorts of deals which are either done or almost done. Some of them need to be go through some parliaments, but they're basically on the road. If Canada showed we really wanted them, they would have been through. There's no question that we have a whole pile of elements which Europe does not have. So we are a very logical partner for the EU. It doesn't mean we should turn our back on the States. As I say, we should sell every bloody, shoe or hat or whatever we can sell to them without giving up anything. And the only way we can not give up anything is by having alternate markets so that they can't back us into a corner. So I think it's incredibly important that we, and I thought, we're in an election, so I don't want to sound like I'm in an election, but I thought it was very smart when Carney became Prime Minister that the first thing he did was get on an airplane and go to Paris. He didn't, as in the Canadian tradition, go to London. He went to Paris. Why did he go to Paris? Because the President of France is a key player with Germany in the EU, and the British, having been idiots, are no longer in the EU. And everybody smart in Britain knows that was the stupidest move they'd made since the Second World War. And so he basically began the negotiation for a new kind of Canadian relationship with Europe. So he's already thinking that far ahead. If he gets in as Prime Minister, he'll take it the rest of the way. Then, of course, he had to go to London, and the British Prime Minister had to see him and not treat him the way British Prime Ministers normally treat Canadian Prime Ministers, because he'd been seen and hugged on the steps of the Élysée Palace in front of the cameras, hugged by the President of France, a new Prime Minister. I mean, it's difficult for me to explain, but when the French Prime Minister hugs a foreign leader in public, it means something. It's a statement of intent, not sexual. And so there's a lot that we could do with Europe, and I think there's a lot we could do with South Asia, and I think there's an enormous amount we can do with Mexico and Latin America. But we have to radically change the kind of feeling in our Foreign Affairs Department, in our Finance Department, all these departments where they really have been trained for so long to think that United States one, China two, and Europe, well, very complicated. Yeah, it is complicated. What's the matter with that? What's the matter with complicated? Get on with it. And we have a big civil service, and we have people who are well trained, and they can do it. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. And maybe one last little piece. The EU is burdened with thousands of years of conflict and tensions and dimensions, whereas Canada comes in and could be that grease in the gears to formulate something. I mean, the era of Canada as a peacemaker in the world. Maybe we have a special place that others would have trouble matching.
Yeah, I don't think it's peacekeeping, but it might be, how do you talk about these things? How do you negotiate these things? I mean, I don't know about you two, but I mean, I've been in endless conversations in Europe, trying to explain to usually older, powerful people how you deal with certain kinds of problems that have to do with language and cultures and races and borders and things like that, how a Canadian would approach it. And you just see their eyes going kind of wobbly, and they just don't know how to deal with the ideas that you're putting forward. But I think there are a lot of younger people in Europe who are coming up who talk. When we're in Europe, we hear them talking about how Canada is a very interesting example. So I think there is a role we could play, and particularly at a time when on their borders they've got a number of problems. But remember, the areas where they have problems are also areas where we know something. Like, we know a lot about those problem areas. We have a lot of Canadians from those problem areas who are interested and go back and have families and so on. So I think we could have a fascinating role to play, but we have to really say, okay, we're redoing the numbers. It's no longer USA #1. It can be in the top 5. And we're going to try and do Europe as #1, and then we'll break that down, because there's the EU, but then there are all these different countries and different possibilities. We have never done this at the really serious level. Now's the time.
Thank you. You give me hope.
Thank you. We have one more person waiting, and that's our last question for this evening.
Hi.
Hi. I was born in Chile, and I came to Canada as a refugee.
I'm sorry?
I was born in Chile.
Right.
And I came to Canada in 1975.
Right.
After the coup in Chile.
Yes.
What's going on in the U.S. right now seems like a coup. I'm hearing other people calling it a coup. Would you do that? Would you call it that?
Well, you see, I mean, I said that I think that by the midterms it'll be clear. I think what happened in Chile, I mean, I've been quite a bit in Chile, and I know exactly what happened there, etc. After all, Chile was one of the most stable countries in Latin America, and so it shouldn't have happened, right? But I think that there have been a series of steps in the United States which lead towards the death of serious democracy. I think that what remains of American democracy is incredibly fragile. And I do think that law, the decision by the Supreme Court on funding, was one of the most important negative decisions that could be made. And you start going through, you can make a very long list which indicates the decline of the United States as sort of a democracy. Can they turn the corner and bring it back? I like to be optimistic. That's why I said maybe if by the midterms they can, if decent people can win the midterms, there's a fight that can be fought. But if they can't win the midterms, then I actually think it's over. I don't know what form the decline will take. I think it will be violent. With that many guns and the country so divided, I think there will be increasing violence. There may indeed be another civil war, not necessarily in the shape of the first one, They're already close to a civil war when you look at the levels of political violence in the country. And just when you have that many guns and that profound division in political beliefs and such ideological beliefs, and then that would be my last comment, which is wherever you have ideologues, you're on the edge of people shooting guns and killing people. So what's always been good about Canada, almost always, we've had our little moments of horror, is that we've always managed to fudge our way through the worst moments, with the exception of the Riel Rebellion and the Japanese arrests during the Second World War. We haven't had too many moments which are and of course the mistreatment of Indigenous people for not as long a period as one thinks, because actually we had a partnership with Indigenous people for about 350 years before we betrayed it. And now, thanks to the Supreme Court, we're putting it back together again. There was a lot of suffering, but it's being put together again, and it will happen. All my Indigenous leader friends are confident that it's happening, because about 30 times they've gone to the Supreme Court, and since what, the 80s or 90s, and every single time the Supreme Court rules against the Canadian government or the provincial governments and for the Indigenous people. This is the best thing that could have happened for Canada. And I mean, there'll be maybe 5 or 10 more, and we have to humiliate totally the belief of the Canadian governmental system that they have certain kinds of power vis-a-vis Indigenous people. The Indigenous people are going to play an enormous role in building this country up to the highest level. And they're ready to do it. I talk to young Indigenous leaders. They're just dying to get at it. The Inuit leaders are fantastic, for example, just fantastic. I think the most exciting young leaders in Canada are Indigenous. Sorry for everybody else, but there you are. Thank you very much.